Um, right, so I have talked about Flexmi before. Flexmi is an XML-based syntax for EMF models. So what we have here is the meta model of a small project scheduling language, where we have the concept of a project containing many tasks being carried out by persons in a team, and then every task has a title, a start date, and then duration, and then some effort allocated to it. And effectively, effort, it tells you which person puts how much of their time into that task. So Flexmi, up until a couple of months ago, it was XML based. So if you wanted to create a model that conforms to this meta model here, so you want a specific project with specific people and specific tasks and so on and so forth, you could use an XML based notation to type in these model elements. And then Flexmi is a parser that can read this resource. It can try to map tag names and attribute names to class names and feature names, and it does this in a fuzzy way. So even if you here type, say, person1, you will see that it is still parsed as an instance of person. And then it supports additional features, such as, for example, templates. So we can specify here more complex structures. A structure, for instance, called long task, which takes effort in years, and then it kind of transforms it into a month-based effort, and so on and so forth. But we have covered templates in a previous call, so I won't go through this again. What is new in terms of Flexmi is that it now also supports a YAML-based syntax. So I could open this file, which is YAML-based, and it contains exactly the same information, right? So you can still have a project that has a person, which is named Alice, and then another person named Bob, and then a task called analysis with a start date, a duration, and so on and so forth. So it's pretty much the same. So with the exception of Charlie, I can get rid of, it's exactly the same information in these two documents. The YAML flavor of Flexmi is also parsed into an EMF resource, which means that you can consume such a model directly from any EMF compatible program. So, for example, from an Epsilon script, from an EGL code generation template, etc. But also beyond Epsilon, from any application that expects an EMF resource. So why implement a second format? Oh, also I should say that the editor and the resource, the underlying resource implementation itself, is smart enough to understand whether the syntax is XML based or YAML based, and to use the right parser and to use the right syntax highlighter. So if I was to say copy this text and paste it here, you can see how a syntax highlighting adapts, and it now highlights this as XML, and how this is parsed as a model. So you don't need to specify anywhere that this is a YAML flavor or it's an XML flavor. The parser decides for itself what it is. So this .yaml kind of string in the file name is not really important. It's not important for parsing. As I said, this is a proper EMF model again. So here I have a small program where I will say something like, well, give me just print all the titles of all tasks, and I can run this and specify that this consumes an EMF model. It's called M, and the model is acme.yaml.flexmi. You can see how this is recognized as an EMF model and how its meta model is also auto-detected. So I will just keep the read and load, right? That might be through, so I'm getting this exception, not sure why, but we do get this analysis, design, and implementation names here. And the same applies to, say, if I was to select the XML-based flavor. So that would be acme.flexmi. Run this, I get exactly the same thing out. So why implement a second flavor? Why, since they do exactly the same thing? It's mainly because most of the times when I was presenting Flexmi, one of the people or more of the people in the audience were, oh, that's really cool, does it come in YAML? And I was like, okay, XML and YAML is the same thing, so you can capture exactly the same information. So it seems to be a matter of, preference, and a matter of even fashion to some extent. YAML does have some kind of syntax that is better than XML in some occasions. So, for example, it supports multi-line strings better. Right, so if we had a multi-line title for a say for a task, and we'd call this, say, analysis and requirements. YAML has this nice kind of syntax where we can break text over multiple lines. And then you can see how the actual text here, if we go to properties, you can see how the actual text is actually trimmed. So you can't see the second line here in the properties view, but maybe if I copy it here, you can, right? So you can see that the trailing white space is removed, and then this bit over here is removed. And I believe it also supports automatic kind of unwrapping of strings. So is it this notation? Yes, so here you can see that here I have typed in the text over 2 lines, but the actual string, it kind of ignores new lines and so on and so forth. So it might be better for larger chunks of text in attributes. Also, it supports the concept of a list. So if I go back to Firefox, maybe I have an example here. Yes, so we can also specify lists like this, which is also quite handy. Also, YAML is a superset of JSON, which means that now Flexmi also supports JSON. So we could use curly brackets, and now indentation is no longer important because JSON is not indentation based, while the other YAML flavor is. So now we can type in models in XML, in JSON, and in YAML, and all of them are handled by effectively the same implementation. Because behind the scenes, what happens is that this is parsed into this. We use a YAML parser to parse this into an in-memory representation, and then from that in-memory representation, we populate an XML document object model, and then the rest of the process is the same as with this flavor of Flexmi. So these two formats, they share about, 95% of their implementation, which means that they are consistent almost by construction. Any questions so far? Not that I've found. It's a pretty straightforward mapping. It is quite simple. Let me see. So let's the Flexmi parser, and then we have two of them. We have the Flexmi YAML parser, which essentially extends the Flexmi XML parser. So what it only does is so this is all the logic to map YAML to XML is within these I don't know, from line 100 to 170. So it's about 70 lines of code to populate an XML DOM from a YAML DOM. They are very, very similar. Of course, this code represents my very poor understanding of YAML. So there may be other combinations, other valid YAML that this cannot, does not make good sense of. But in the examples I've tried, it seems to be doing what I thought it would do. Okay. Yeah, it remains to be seen why I got that exception over there. But okay, do not use tab for indentation. Yes, forgetting to do that. Okay, so second thing I wanted to say, second update, is a new view. Oh, of course, as I showed in a previous demo, we can turn Flexmi into XMI. So I could right click and say generate XMI, and then this becomes a regular EMF model stored in XMI that anything that works with XMI can work with. Now, another handy feature that was recently implemented is an interpreter view, right? So here, let me just minimize this. So here we can type queries. So say return self.name, and then we can execute these queries on a live EMF-based editor. So if I click on this bit here, what does it say? It is, yes. So now that I made an error, it says that a property name has not been found, so that's right. I'll change this to title and evaluate again, and I'll get implementation. It also displays objects, so it could do something like self.effort, and then we'll get these two objects here, or could do something like self.effort.percentage, and then we'll get two numbers instead. And it also supports this auto evaluation mode. So for the self.title, and then I click on this real-time evaluation, then as I select different elements in the editor, it will run this expression against them, and it will, I think actually if I even do that, yes, it will run this this code against the selection and update the results here. So this is quite handy when you need to figure out how to go from one element to another, instead of having to create a new EOL file and to write your expressions, etc. You can try out expressions over here. We shouldn't take full credit for this, because this view is actually provided by the Axeleo project, and it supports pluggable languages. So the only thing I've done here is to create an EOL interpreter. Let's go. So the only code I had to write was that much, right? So line 36 to 91, about not even 60 lines of code. All the rest is provided by the Axelio interpreter view. We just had to contribute an execution engine for it. So that was a low-hanging fruit. It's always nice to find software that is so easily extensible and where the results look so good. Any questions on this one? Yep.
I have a small question on the YAML syntax.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen encountered when I tried to use the YAML flavor.
Mm-hmm.
So could you maybe go to the EML to give an example of what I'm talking about?
Yes. To this one.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, for example, you have a class project.
Mm-hmm.
That class has an array of persons.
That's right.
People.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, in your YAML file now,
Mm-hmm.
you declare a project with two people,
Mm-hmm.
two persons,
Yep.
and it automatically, the parser automatically took these two objects of class person and put in the right array.
Yes.
So I have a question. If, let's say, we had two arrays
Mm-hmm.
in class project,
Mm-hmm.
and it was both of class person,
Mm-hmm.
how would the parser know which object of class person to put into array 1 and array 2?
Okay. I see.
People and, secondary people or something like that.
Yes. Okay. So suppose we had another array here, which we called other people. Okay. I can tell you how this is done in XML, and then I can try to figure out how it's done in YAML. So in XML, now if we go to the XML flavor, I no longer need this. If we go to the XML flavor, then you can see that these have been put under people, right? I could be specific about this.
Right. So it's the fuzziness of the Flexmi that allows it to, even though we didn't explicitly declare
Yes.
in which those objects do
Yeah.
be contained,
Yeah.
it automatically knows
Exactly.
one container of type person.
Yeah.
So presumably.
So another thing you could do is you could just give these a better name. So you could use the name of the reference instead of the name of the type. And then it will work out that, other is closer to other people, so this can only be a person. Now, if you run into more complex cases where you have multiple references, but also that they have multiple possible subtypes, then you need to use this other solution. Now,
Yeah, in the YAML flavor, so I would probably declare a list, right? A YAML list.
But a list is of scalars, right? So lists are lists of, so it's like this. Maybe do something like yeah. So you can see now how these persons were put under other people. Or you could just do shown before other, and then one of them goes under people, the other one goes under other people. Mm-hmm. Yes. This is a non-containment reference. Sorry, no, sorry. This is a non-containment reference. Ah, okay, I see. Then you would use commas. I think that's a good question. So suppose that person also has friends, right? Ah, no, we already have a person has skills. So yes, there are two ways to do that. You can have so this is one way. You can use a YAML. Yeah, maybe you do. I don't know. I mean, YAML feels very liberal. So come on. And then it doesn't like tabs. It only likes spaces. Anyway, very opinionated. That works. Does that work too? I don't know. It doesn't. You need the dashes, I guess, to denote that it's a list. And also, I think what you can do is you could also say, maybe, no, you can't. Ah, could be. Could be. Yes, could be. So we'd need a skill name Java and another skill name HTML. Okay. I said here that this could be Java, HTML. So if we go to Bob and go to the property. Yep. Okay, that's good. But I think you've uncovered a bug here, because that should also produce a warning when these two skills are not present. And it doesn't. Yes, and it happens. It happens here as well. So if you say that this is person Alice 1, and you get a warning that there's no Alice 1 person. So the most probably it's a matter of mapping the YAML lines for lists to the respective XML lines, because effectively the error is detected at the level of XML, and then it needs to be mapped back to YAML in terms of just of lines of code, just for presentation purposes. So this is good. I will have a look into that. Anything else? Any other questions on this? Yeah, sure. Yes, all of that works. So you could say that let's say what could we say? Okay, that this task so this task we will make it a variable. We will call it design, and then the start of this task is design dot start plus design dot duration plus 1. So now if we go to implementation, we will see that it starts on month 11, because that's where that's where the design task stops. And if we change the start date of the design task, say to month 6, now the design task will end on month 12. So if we look at the implementation again, now it starts on month 13. So we can have these executable attributes in YAML 2.
Is that also possible in Flexmi? Not.
In a regular Flexmi? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that works fine in Flexmi as well. Yeah, I don't have Bob and Alice here. When did yes, I deleted them over here. Yes, that is possible. So the way to do that here would be to say that, well, this is a var, it's called design, and then the start date here is whatever I said here. And then if we look at implementation, it's 11 again. Sorry, I think it was Horatio there.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, okay, thank you.
Okay, good. Right, and any more questions before I move on to the last little feature? Okay, so something I wanted to do for a very, very long time. So far, it was not possible to run epsilon from Ant, Maven, or Gradle outside of Eclipse. So it needed, you could always use the API and write a standalone application and so on and so forth, but then you would need to worry about dependencies, and you need to write the custom code, etc. We've always had the Ant tasks that we can use to actually orchestrate epsilon programs. So what we have here is a small program that loads an EMF-based model, and then it runs an EOL program against it. But in order to run this from command line, if you don't have Eclipse installed, if you don't have any of that installed, if you only have, say, Apache Ant installed, is you'd need to get hold of all the epsilon libraries, all the kind of epsilon jar files, put them in the right path, register the Ant tasks, and then run the tasks, which was quite a bit of an effort. Now, what is possible with the latest version is we have an example project under examples that contains a build file and unbuild file that is truly standalone. So it uses Ivy, which is another Apache project, in order to fetch the dependencies from Maven Central, fetch all the epsilon libraries from Maven Central. Then it does magic and it installs the tasks. It makes the Ant tasks known, the epsilon tasks known to Maven, and then you can run epsilon just from command line. So if I go to this folder here, see the examples, workflow, okay, I can just So this is my build file, my build XML. I haven't downloaded any copies of the Epsilon libraries whatsoever. I just have my meta model, my Ecore meta model. I have a small model that conforms to it, and I have a program that actually queries the model and prints all the book titles for every writer. This is just a simple library model, meta model. So if I just run ant here, because I have this build file, it will go and download all the extensions, all the jar files from Maven, from the Maven repository, and it will run my program. So this is a kind of one command way to run Epsilon programs now. And given that Ant is kind of the grandfather of build systems in the Java ecosystem, newer systems such as Maven and Gradle also support executing Ant tasks. So in this article here, there are also examples showing how we can use Epsilon tasks from standalone Maven builds. So here you have a pom.xml. If you're familiar with Maven, so what we do is we declare the two dependencies to the Epsilon workflow library and the Epsilon workflow library that contains EMF tasks, and then we use the Maven Antron plugin, so the integration between Maven and Ant. We load the tasks, the Epsilon tasks, to Ant, and then we can use the standard Ant tasks to execute our Epsilon programs and load models and so on and so forth. Again, nothing to download here. If you have this file and the program and your model and your meta model, it's just a matter of typing something like mvn. I need to remind myself what we need to type in here. Yes, mvn clean install, and that will again fetch all the dependencies required, and it will run our program against it will load the model and run the program against the model. So we can see here how this is the output of our program. And then last but not least, another framework that is very popular these days, it's called Gradle, another build tool that comes from well, it is used a lot in the Android ecosystem, but also in the wider Java ecosystem. And unlike Maven and Ant, it's not XML based. It uses a JVM based language called Groovy for its syntax. If you look at its structure, again, very similar. It uses Maven style repositories for dependencies. So all we need to do is we need to specify these two dependencies to the workflow and the workflow EMF libraries. We need to specify the repository from which these dependencies are going to be pulled. And then Gradle provides support for Ant tasks. So we can use these task def commands to actually configure Ant with the extra Epsilon tasks. And then we can call our Epsilon EMF load model to load our model, and then our Epsilon EOL task to run this program against the model. And all of these are essentially just reusing the same implementations of the Epsilon Ant tasks. So now it is possible to run Epsilon completely standalone from command line using standard Maven and Gradle without needing to write any additional Java code.